A little bit of spice can add a lot of flavor. I'm Susan Bowerman, registered dietitian, and today we're talking spices. You know, people often talk about herbs and spices in the same breath. They're really a little bit different. Herbs technically are the leafy portions of plants, whereas spices encompass much more. Spices can be roots like ginger root, or they can be flowers like cloves, or they can be fruits like nutmeg. They can be seeds like sesame seeds or poppy seeds. They can even be bark like cinnamon. And the range of flavors in spices is huge. They can be sweet like cinnamon or nutmeg or clove. They can be pungent like ginger or peppers or chili. And sometimes with the seeds, you're adding texture. You put in poppy seeds or sesame seeds. So you have all this variety of things that you can add to your dishes. Now again, I always say in cooking, there are no hard and fast rules, and I think that you want to play around with spices in the kitchen, but I want to tell you about some of my favorite ones and why I use them so much. One of my favorite spices are cumin. That's one of my very, very favorite spices. I turn to it most often because cumin marries so well with all these different types of dishes. It's in Indian food, it's in Mexican food, it's in Middle Eastern food. It has a wonderful pungent aroma and it adds a wonderful flavor to foods. Sometimes I even just sprinkle a little bit on my scrambled eggs. I just love the flavor of cumin. The other one that I turn to frequently is cinnamon. It's my favorite sweet spice. I always put it into my shakes because I love the flavor of cinnamon. I put it on top of yogurt with fruit when I have that sometimes in the morning. The other thing I like to do with cinnamon is put just a tiny dash of it into some rice when it's cooking. It lends a wonderful aroma to the rice. It's also a nice thing to even put into a stew if you don't overdo it. It adds a warmth to the stew without making it taste really sweet. So again, play around with some of these spicy, warm spices like cinnamon or nutmeg. Paprika. I love paprika. It is a spice, but it's really made from a pepper. So peppers have been dried and roasted and then ground into a powder. And paprika gives a wonderful pungency and color. And I love to put it on top of chicken or fish before I cook it because of the color and the flavor that it lends. Or you can even make a classic chicken paprikash, which is basically a chicken stew. Usually calls for sour cream. I use Greek yogurt. It's beautiful. It has a bright, bright orange color that's lovely to have on your dinner table. What about pepper? Most of us have black pepper in our kitchen. It's great. It's my go-to. I always have a pepper grinder when I'm cooking, but sometimes I like to use white pepper or sometimes hot red pepper. White pepper is nice because it's strong, but it also is invisible. So if you're putting it into a dish where you don't want to see those black pepper flakes, that's sometimes a nice time to use that white pepper. Red pepper flakes are actually made from a chili pepper. And they're very, very hot and spicy, but they're wonderful in things like pasta sauces, or they're really, really good in salsas. So each pepper is slightly different in terms of the flavor and in terms of the pungency that it adds to your dish. And then I would say the last spice that I turn to most often is ginger. Ginger has a distinct flavor, it's pungent, and it pairs with a lot of different dishes. It's delicious in stir fries. If you use a little garlic and a little soy sauce and some ginger, it's wonderful. It also goes really, really well with carrots. Ginger and carrot is a classic combination. Sometimes I'll use it in a salad dressing. If I'm making a salad dressing with a little sesame oil and ginger, it adds a wonderful flavor to mixed greens. Sometimes people ask me about pre-made blends, and I think they're great, especially if spices are something that you're not used to using. Because one of the things that these pre-made blends can do is kind of show you how different spices, and maybe even in combination with herbs, how they work together to bring the right flavors to a particular dish. One thing you'll want to look for, though, if you do use these spice blends, is try to avoid ones that have salt as the first ingredient, because what you're really wanting is the flavor of the spices and maybe the herbs, but you don't really want to be adding a lot of salt to your dishes. The last thing is that how should you store these? It's always best to store your spices in the dark, keep them someplace where they're relatively cool. If you keep them well sealed, they should stay fresh for 6 months to maybe a year. I think it's a good idea to just, when you open them, just take a whiff and make sure that they still have a nice aroma and they still have a strong odor. And that way you know that they're still good to use. The last thing is that if you're going to be cooking with these things, keep in mind that many of the flavor compounds, the things that give them their flavors and their aromas, they're fat soluble. And so oftentimes when you're cooking with spices, you actually want to cook them a little bit longer rather than herbs that are added at the very end. And sometimes people will even toast them a little bit in a dry pan because it starts to release some of those flavor compounds, or even saute them in a little bit of oil before adding them to the dish. So there's a lot of experimenting that you can do with spices in the kitchen. And again, remember, no rules. Pull out some of those spices that you bought for that recipe last year and try experimenting and see what works well for you.